And we have three presenters online, Dr. Kushal, Dr. Hisham Tariq, and Dr. Azhar Inam. We are starting the next session entitled Building Resilience Through Community Engagement. The session is specifically focused on how we can engage local communities at the grassroots level in disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and sustainable development. During the last session, we heard from Dr. Babar Shahbaz that we need to engage people at the grassroots level. The reason for engagement, the community is that they are the direct victims of disaster, but at the same time, they are not only the victims, but they are the active responder to any type of catastrophic situation as well. So that is the reason that we need to develop the capacities of the community at the grassroots level in order to make them resilient to disaster, shock, and stresses. We have five panelists in this session. The session is chaired by Mr. Salim Shehzad Malik, the Director, National Disaster Management Authority. He is on his way and will join us soon. We will be having special remarks from Ms. Shabnam Baloch, Country Director, International Rescue Committee, Pakistan. Our first panelist is Dr. Kushal, Program Director, Research Center for Disaster Resilience, University of Salford, UK. Our second presenter is Mr. Hisham Tariq, Research Fellow at the Think Lab Center and Center for Disaster Resilience at the University of Salford. The third presenter is Dr. Azhar Inam from Bauddin Zakaria University, Multan. And the fourth presenter is Dr. Khatamul from Tharparkar, Sindh. Dr. Shafqat Munir will be delivering the concluding remarks of the session. So we are proceeding further, and I would like to invite Dr. Kushal to deliver a talk on breaking barriers, framework for community engagement. Please, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And good afternoon to all the colleagues from Pakistan, and my apologies in advance. Even though that I was looking forward to join you in Pakistan, we couldn't join this time. But nevertheless, I think I can see that it's a very successful conference that you have there. So my congratulations to all the organizers and participants. If I may share my screen so that I can do the presentation, let me open up. I hope you all can see my presentation now.
Yes, Dr. Kushal, we can hear you. And it is there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yes. My screen has gone blank. Give me 1 second. Yes, I think it's good now. Okay, thank you. Right, so my discussion today is actually around breaking barriers, framework for community engagement. And I'm planning to do this presentation based on our Transcend program. And I'll introduce the Transcend program a little bit later, but I'm sure you must have heard from our PI, Professor Terence Fernando, and Professor Bingwing Grige in the morning sessions. So straight away, I will try and get into the discussion in the interest of time. Before I start my session, let me quickly acknowledge the support that we are getting from the GCRF fund. That's the funder for our Transcend program, and they fund all sort of activities in terms of dissemination, in terms of research activities for the Transcend program that we are carrying out. And further acknowledgements for Ms. Devin Bigikinage and Mr. Hisham Tariq. They are the researchers working on the work package 2 of our Transcend program, which we are going to talk about. And at the same time, I'm using some of the content that they have developed in my presentation. So my thank and acknowledgement goes to them. And of course, Professor Terence is also the PI of the program. So I would like to acknowledge him as well in this presentation. So let me introduce the core of my presentation today. Well, I'll be talking mainly about three things. And I will be starting with the concept of building forward better. I think that's the theme of the program, a theme of the conference this year as well. And I'm trying to link that concept with the communities and urban developments in the interest of community engagement. So that's the, if you like, the theme of my presentation. And within that, I'll be introducing the concept of Transcend, the scope of Transcend, basically the project that we are carrying out at the moment in the UK in collaboration with SDPI and other colleagues from Malaysia, Pakistan, and so on. So the three main things that I'm going to talk about are centered around, first, the barriers and enablers of citizen engagement. And secondly, I'll be talking about mapping participatory methods into spectrum of community engagement, how we engage with the communities. And thirdly, I'll be talking about the concept of transformation of communities. If you think about these three aspects, they are interlinked. So the barriers and enablers will define how we engage with the communities, and that engagement will define how we transform the communities in the interest of disaster-induced resettlements and development-induced resettlements, and so on and so forth. So finally, at the end of the presentation, I'd like to present a framework that we have developed as a part of the Transcend program, which will enable all these three aspects, and hopefully this framework will inform our decision makers, local authorities, so that they can use this framework to inform their future work. That's the plan for today. And if the time permits, I will show you some case studies and case study analysis that we've done as a part of the program, so that you get a bit more understanding as to where these concepts have emerged from. So let me start with the first background, really. So I was going to talk about, as I said, the three terms, if you like. So the main theme is around building forward better. I'm sure we must have heard, we all have heard the term building back better concept, which has been discussing for so many years. And the idea behind building back better is actually how to recover from a disaster and so on and so forth. And during the recovery phase, during building from a disaster, how we can make the things better. But extending that concept, I think it is high time that we look at how to build forward better, rather than looking at the destructive events and how to recover from that. We can actually make an advance in terms of making or preparing ourselves for a better future. That's the idea behind building forward. So in that sense, I think the building forward better concept links more closely with concepts like urban development. And then when it comes to the concept of urban development, building forward better and things like that, I think we have to put the communities at the forefront, because they are the people who are actually benefiting from activities such as urban development, and at the same time they're at the forefront of they're at the forefront receiving the consequences of unplanned urban developments and the risks that inherently that we get from urban development activities. So that's the sort of the background to what we are going to discuss today. So within this context, what I'm planning to do is I'm planning to present 4 research questions that we have addressed within our Transcend program. By the way, the Transcend program is a GCRF funded research program that we have that we are working for the last 3 years or so. and SDPI and other colleagues from Pakistan is also part of our program, and they are international collaborators. And we have collaborators from other countries like Malaysia and Sri Lanka. So this is an international collaboration predominantly looking at the risk-sensitive urban development. So as a part of risk-sensitive development, of course, then we need to look at how to minimize the risk sensitivity from the community's point of view. And that is the main discussion point that we take forward within this presentation, as well as that has been discussed within the work package 2 of our Transcend program. So within that, we predominantly answered 4 research questions. So the research questions are basically, what are the barriers and challenges of community engagement for potential solution and the potential solutions for risk-sensitive urban development? That's the first question. And secondly, we are looking at what are the community engagement methods, tools, which are commonly discussed in the participatory decision-making process. Thirdly, and most importantly, we are also looking at how to measure community transformation. So the main aspect of helping communities to engage within development activities and so on is to transform them to receive the benefits. So how we measure this transformation is our third question. And fourth question would be, what indicators can be used to measure the community transformation? So these are the 4 main research questions, if you like, that we were trying to address through our Transcend program under work package 2. And now what I'm planning to do is, I'm planning to actually go through answers to these research questions as we found through our research. So first of all, let's look at the first question. What are the barriers and challenges of community engagement for potential solutions? Of course, it is context specific. And when we look at challenges and barriers, they may differ from one country to another, one situation to another, and so on and so forth. But what we did in this particular aspect through our Transcend program, we did a comprehensive review of barriers and challenges within the global context. When we did that, we actually found about quite a bit of challenges and barriers. And this is the methodology that we have followed to find such enablers and barriers. We did a comprehensive literature review to start with, and we followed what is known as the PRISMA methodology for systematic review. I'm not going to go into this, the details of how this review has been conducted, but more details are available within our publications. I'm more than happy to share that with you. But let me share the outcomes of this particular review. I hope you all can see this. I'm not a big fan of congested slides, but I couldn't help put this slide, all the details in this particular slide related to the barriers and enablers for citizen engagement. So as I mentioned, through our research, we found there are 48 constraints to community engagement. So the main discussion point within this session is all about community engagement and how community engagement can actually lead to better disaster resilience and community resilience and so on and so forth. Before we get into that discussion, we need to recognize that there are barriers. And in fact, through our research, we found that there are 48 constraints. And these barriers, we have actually categorized these barriers into 6 themes and 3 specific areas. So the specific areas are basically the context, the infrastructure, and the process. So under each of these specific areas, we listed 6 main themes under which we recognize the 48 constraints. So if I'm to go through very quickly what are these 6 areas are, or 6 themes are, their community capacity. So one of the main challenges that we've seen, why communities are not engaging in development activities or disaster-induced resettlement activities, is that their capacity to engage. So we've recognized that as one of the major barriers. And then we have this other more sensitive issue of the trust between the community and industry partners as one of the other barriers that we've recognized. Power-centric organizational cultures, attitudes, and their knowledge has also been recognized as one of the major areas why communities are reluctant to engage in activities related to community engagement. When it comes to infrastructure, well, of course, in developing countries, as we all know, there are so many challenges related to infrastructure, investments, and so on and so forth. And of course, that goes without saying, that is also a major contributory factor for less than ideal community engagement. In terms of processes, we have recognized that most of the processes that we are using, especially within the developing country context, they are not ideally suited to get the communities engaged. And we have discussed about this in detail in our publications. And inclusive and accessibility practices also. So when we talk about communities, we invariably have to talk about the vulnerable communities, whether we have systems in place to get them engaged in the community engagement process is a question. And what we found out through the review is that we don't have such processes in place, adequately placed within our systems to facilitate that. So these are the overall barriers that we've identified for community engagement. And I'm not going to go into the 48 constraints, but I have actually explained to you what are the major themes that we have recognized through this. So having recognized all these barriers and challenges to community engagement, how do we get them to engage, basically? So for that, we also did a comprehensive review as to what tools and techniques available for us. And so I'm sure all of you are available, the local tools and techniques that we're using, different contexts, different countries, different programs, they may be using different practices in order to get the communities engaged. But what is the global knowledge? What is the global practice that we can sort of set as the baseline for community engagement? So what we did was we recognized that there are, talking generally, there are about 5 phases of community engagement. One is to inform or outreach the communities. So let's say there's a development process. One of the aspects of community engagement would be to inform them about that. And then in some cases, we consult them. That's the second aspect. And in rare cases, we get them involved in the process of developing, designing the development activities. And well, if you go further, then the ideal situation would be to get them either to collaborate and to empower them to make decisions about, okay, how the development activities should take place. So by looking at these 5 phases, we have devised a different set of tools and techniques that we can use to facilitate this process. Again, in the time of interest, in the interest of time, I won't be going into the details of each of these activities and tools and techniques, but again, the details are presented within our publications. I'm more than happy to talk about or discuss these techniques in detail when the time permits. So that's the second aspect that I wanted to talk about, which are centered around what are the tools and techniques that we use, that we can use in the global context to avoid or to minimize the barriers that we have recognized previously for effective community engagement. Now, the third thing is the most important thing, if you like. So by doing all this, why we are trying to get the communities engaged in our development processes and how we get them involved, all that leads to the discussion on how we transform communities for civic participation. Because at the end of the day, I'm sure you all agree, the purpose of community engagement in disaster-induced resettlements or any other aspect like development-induced resettlements or any other aspect like that would be to transform them to receive the benefits of such activities. So how do we transform them? And how do we recognize that we manage to transform them. So we actually investigated this quite deeply in our research. In fact, we looked at certain theories that would drive this transformation. And we looked at things like community coalition action, transition theory. There are things like theory of planned behavior. So there are various community theories and psychological theories that we have explored in terms of placing how we transform communities into a better place when it comes to disaster or development-induced resettlements. And by looking at all those theories, we devised, we thought that it would be good for us to use a methodology called CAP, which represent knowledge, attitude, and practice as our main measures when we look at how the communities are transformed from one position to another. So let's take an example. So before a disaster, if we can measure the knowledge, the attitude, and the practice of a community in terms of their resilience, and if we measure the same variables after a disaster, after a resettlement, then we can form a baseline as to whether we could actually transform a community from being a low resilient community into a high resilient community. So the theory behind this and the methodologies that we have followed in order to establish this framework is beyond this discussion. Actually, it takes time for us to explain this, but again, I'd like to refer you to the publications that we've made on this. So those are the three important things that we would like to draw your attention to within this presentation. And in addition to that, we have devised a fairly detailed practitioner-oriented framework to help practitioners in the industry to guide these three processes. So again, the details of this framework is presented within this particular diagram, but it is too complicated within a forum like this for me to go into each and every element of this particular framework. But the idea today is to give you the exposure to the availability of this particular framework and to initiate a discussion as to how we use this framework in practical implementation. That's what I wanted to cover within this session today, and I'm very much aware of the fact that these are sort of very high-level details that are presented today. I didn't want to go into the technical nitty-gritty of how the things are implemented, but as I mentioned, the main discussion point or the main intention of this presentation was to introduce that these are the activities that we have carried out, and eventually to present to you the availability of this particular framework so that the discussion can continue in different and more suitable forums for us to get into the discussion of how we can use this framework for our future activities. Indeed, I have actually incorporated quite a few other slides actually in this presentation, in case if anybody is interested in getting to know about more details of each of these elements that are presented. But in the interest of time, I think I'd like to conclude my presentation at this point. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Kushal. On behalf of the organizing committee of the conference in this session, I welcome Mr. Salim Shehzad Malik, Director, PNIC, National Disaster Management Authority, Pakistan, as chair of this session. Now I would like to invite Mr. Hisham Tariq to talk about measuring community disaster resilience at local level and adoptable resilience framework. Please, sir.
Hello, I'll be sharing my screen. If you can confirm.
Yes, screen share. Yes, it is done. Hisham, you carry on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank and congratulate SDPI for organizing such a landmark conference. We've had an interesting couple of sessions, a couple of days actually, full of very informative sessions. I would also like to thank Kaushal for introducing Transcend, and of course, Professor Terence Fernando in the first session, and Bingu for giving a bit of an introduction. So I don't have to go into detail about the Transcend.
Nishant,
Yes.
can you confirm you have shared the screen? ये बिल्कुल black आ रहा है screen.
Acha. Let me check.
Reshare कर दूं?
I'm sharing it now. Can you see my screen?
Oh, no, we can't see.
It's still a blank screen.
Slide change करें. Next slide.
From my side, it says it's sharing screen.
We are also getting the same message.
Can you see the screen now? I'm reconnecting. If there's a problem, maybe I can ask Dr. Azharanam, are you ready to for your presentation? I can then join.
Okay, we can see the screen now.
You can see the screen?
Yeah, it's with Mobilize and Transcend on the.
Yes, Hisham, we can see it now.
Okay, so yes, I'll be talking about our experience in the Mobilize and Transcend projects about measuring or discussing with our stakeholders how to measure this concept, the disaster resilience concept at the local level. This is a word cloud of some of the research that we've generated from this discussion. And as you can see, community-based research, participatory methods, talking about urban development, about resilience as a system. These are very much what we've been looking at and what we've been publishing on during this project. And part of and the stated goal is to contribute to some of the sustainable SDGs, as has been covered over the couple of days in this conference. We would Mobilize and Transcend both contribute to developing sustainable cities and communities, and especially developing collaboration partnership for the goals during that process, and also to bring in industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Something that we were really interested in the University of Salford is bringing technology for the use of practitioners in different fields. Also, from this discussion with resilience and marginal resilience, we've also been looking to contributing to peace, justice, and developing stronger institutions to sort of bring the SDG goals to reality on the ground. Some of the discussions have looked at Transcend living labs, and the concept was briefly discussed by Professor Terence earlier. I just want to bring it back here because this is very much the mechanism by which Transcend and Mobilize look to interact with our partners on the ground. So the living lab basically is built for. I mean, it's a virtual and a physical space. And it's built to support experiential learning cycle among stakeholders. And it can be used for risk-sensitive urban design. It can be used for disaster risk reduction. It can be used for any sort of collaborative purpose in that respect. But in Transcend and Mobilize, we've particularly used it for looking at case studies of issues that are facing communities and with regards to resilience to certain disasters. And the core concepts here are trying to understand the system within the resilience issues of the community, look at the boundaries, look at the interrelationships, and also to co-design solutions with those stakeholders. So then they can be proposed for implementation and then for monitoring as well. But the key thing here is to encourage dialogue and collaboration. And this has been done in Malaysia through the Living Lab in Selangor, to the Living Lab in Sarawak, which I've also had an opportunity to work with in the field. And also in Pakistan, it's been applied in Peshawar for 2 case studies, one in Peshawar, one in Nowshera, and also with STPI, we're looking forward to a case study in Sindh. And also in Sri Lanka for the Kaluwuthara landslides, and also in certain parts of Colombo for urban development. So this is a very much an approach to bring in and share this dialogue and collaboration, these tools for dialogue and collaboration amongst our stakeholders for disaster risk reduction. Some of the, there was a number of themes discussed in the Living Lab. Kaushal talked about community engagement, and the earlier presenters talked about looking at climate change and certain things about collaboration. For this presentation, I just want to touch upon some of the themes regarding community resilience. What have we done in the Think Lab, in the Living Lab, regarding these some of these questions, some of the broader questions that we're looking at and trying to find answers for. So one of these things that we had discussions with our stakeholders, including practitioners and members of academia, or what communities are actually a system of systems, and you know, we want to look at the complexity in this system, and sort of like understand the breadth and the width of the what sort of dimensions, what sort of components go into this interlinked complexity. Another of the questions was look at the objective and subjective nature of resilience measurement. It's always, resilience is sort of like in the eye of the beholder type of question. So how is resilience defined and how is it evaluated, and from whose perspective? Another of the themes is contextualizing resilience to local realities. So what techniques can be used to allow local actors to participate in this process, to define and assess resilience dimensions and capacities? We don't have time, of course, to go into all of these, but I'll just briefly touch upon some of the activities we've done as part of the Transcend Living Lab in Pakistan mainly. So the first question looked at understanding the complexity of community disaster resilience. We need to understand resilience from local perspectives, from the, you know, looking at the local community, at the ward level, at the urban neighborhood, and try to understand it from a systems perspective, because they can help us understand the behavior that emerges from these systems interacting together. And also a transdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approach was mentioned earlier as well in the previous session. And this is something that also a systems approach encourages, and it actually fosters this cross-silo thinking that's been mentioned as well. Also, we need to recognize there are subsystems, there are dimensions, and there are subsystems within dimensions. And different stakeholders have different perspectives regarding these subsystems. They are priorities, different priorities. Some stakeholders will prioritize physical infrastructure. Some stakeholders, particularly at the community level, might be more interested in social or economic resilience aspects. So it's important to recognize this sort of diversity in perspectives. For the Living Lab, we've looked at how to model this complexity of resilience. And there are 2 approaches that we've used. One is a systems thinking approach, which helps us make sense of the system, understand the system, and engage with the multiple perspectives that are involved for resilience. Also, there's a system dynamics approach. We're looking at developing simulation models. We model resilience as a behavior dynamically. And then we try to understand how certain actions might lead to feedback loops, lead to delays, and perhaps identify leverage tipping points, which can contribute to success or failure of certain interventions and policies regarding resilience. I won't go into detail about the core concept of the model that we're using in our specification. We're writing up there's going to be a publication on it as well, and we've have several publications in this regard, but it's just simple. It's a capacity approach. We look at the capacities, the existing capacities of a community as a dynamic value, and then we try to understand how this develops over time. My colleague Dr. Azhar Inam might go into more detail about system dynamics, simulation modeling, so I'll let him explain a bit more about that. But just to suffice to say, they are included in these slides. If anyone's interested on a conversation about this, we're more than happy to engage with them and sort of help them bring this sort of modeling tool approach to their work. And this is being applied in case studies In Pakistan, one of the case studies for the Butni Nala flash flooding case study, we're looking at households and what sort of resilience issues, and particularly economic resilience issues, they face as a consequence of the frequent flash flooding that they have experienced previously. So like we said, resilience framework, it will help us model interdependencies within these dimensions. And I won't go into detail here, but this is something we can look at in the future. Again, one of the other discussions we've had in the Living Lab in Pakistan and in other partner countries is the objective and subject approach to measuring resilience. How is resilience defined and evaluated for our stakeholders? We've done an extensive literature review, and we found that the majority of these frameworks look at a top-down approach. Although there are some with a bottom-up approach, but we're looking at sort of like enhancing our ability to engage with stakeholders by using resilience frameworks that actually encourage a bottom-up approach. We let them define resilience, and there's a number of resilience. We did a survey, we did a literature review, and we found a lot of different types of resilience frameworks. We arranged them in this sort of classification. And we thought that it would be more beneficial for our stakeholders to have a subjectively defined, objectively evaluated approach to resilience measurement. And this is what we resulted in a publication regarding adaptable community disaster resilience framework, where our resilience framework is very much a combination of other approaches depending on your perspective of the stakeholder. We let them select those dimensions that are important to them and incorporate localized knowledge, incorporate contextualize the framework according to local needs and requirements, and hopefully get them on board with the resilience assessment of their communities. This is a sort of like a library of measures that we've developed. We can share this with our stakeholders. They can select which dimensions they want to measure. They can select which indicators are important for them, sort of like the KPIs, the key performance indicators that they are interested in. And this can be done with stakeholders like local government, with the disaster management authorities, or even community members. So to understand what sort of key performance indicators they are interested in regarding their own resilience. This has been published in the International Journal of Disasters Reduction, and it has been recognized as by the publisher to contribute to one of the SDGs, especially the one on peace, justice, and strong institutions, and trying to promote equitable resilience. So please check this out as well. The third discussion we've had regarding contextualizing resilience using Living Labs. So in Transcend, in the Living Lab approach, we have several tools that we can use: stakeholder analysis, causal loop diagrams, M tools. I'll just go quickly over some of them. We're actually preparing, we have prepared a short course, online course or a hybrid course that we have offered to our partners in Pakistan, in Malaysia, and Sri Lanka. We've trained more than 40 participants. We sort of like have a course on system thinking tools, which can be used by our partners to understand, to first confirm the goal of the intervention or the risk reduction or the risk sensitive urban design approach that we're using, understand the system that they're in, then co-design and test some of the tools, and then implement, monitor, and evaluate them. So we're offering these courses free of charge to our partners. And if you're interested in this, please contact our STPI partners, and we'll be more than happy to incorporate you in the next round of trainings. So again, the adaptable community disaster resilience looks to work through some stages. The first 3 stages are relatively low cost, low time requirements, and low technical skills required. So this can be picked up very quickly through a 1 hour or 2 hour training which we provide. Our stakeholders can actually start the discussion on problem framing, looking at stakeholders involved analysis, and then qualitatively model some issues that they're facing in the community. We've had the experience of using this in our case studies, and it's been a very profound, very interesting experience and a learning experience for all of us as well. So again, the modeling tools depend on the depth of insight. For just to capture the elements within a system. Sometimes a qualitative approach is enough, and we can get enough information to realize what's going on and how things can be improved. But sometimes a deeper approach is required, a simulation modeling approach is required, and that would require a system dynamics a model, a participatory system dynamics model. And this is something that we've been using in the Think Lab, in the Living Lab with our partners as well. I'll just cover some of the tools we've used, some of the tools that are being used by our partners in the field. An M tool is like a mental model mapping tool, which is a digital tool which can be used by our researchers in the field. It's really quick to use, quick to learn, easy to use, and can generate quick maps of what people are thinking regarding what's going on in the field regarding resilience issues that they're facing. An example would be in Peshawar, we did on flash flooding in Budhi Nala, and we quickly derived a causal loop diagram to look at some of the major interacting dimensions within this framework. We've also had some publications recently, which I will include at the end of the presentation, so you can take a look at as well. We have an approach that looks at participatory co-design of community capacity tools, where stakeholders can select what measures, what indicators are important to them. And this has also been published. There have been 2 publications regarding collaborative use of this in the Living Lab, one in Sri Lanka and one in Malaysia, and we're currently writing up one for Pakistan. And this has been a fruitful experience to interact with different stakeholders and trying to understand resilience from their point of view. This is an example of a group model building session which takes place in one, which combines all the tools that I've mentioned earlier and can be done in one day with across 4 hours with different stakeholder groups to capture what they are thinking, what their perspectives are. And this is an example of what we are going to be conducting in these Living Labs in the future in Pakistan, in Nowshera and in Peshawar, and also as planned by STPI in Sindh. These are some of the publications I'm happy to share with you. And also, like I mentioned, we have short courses coming up. We also have a systems thinking booklet coming up, which we'll share with our stakeholders. It will also be translated in Urdu. So there will be a systems thinking booklet for practitioners, for academics, also for community members, and also a systems thinking toolkit, which sort of arranges all these different tools that we've used to capture perspectives, mental models, and develop qualitative and quantitative models. So please stay in touch and please stay in touch with our STPI local partners and the University of Peshawar and Bahauddin Zakaria University, who are actually actively working in the field with these tools. So thank you very much for giving me the time for this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. In the remaining time, I can accommodate 3 speakers with 8-minute time for each one. So I request each one of them not to take more than 8 minutes. Now I request Dr. Azarina to speak about quantifying the transient shock response of dynamic agro-ecosystem variable for improved socio-environmental resilience. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Can you see the screen, please?
Yes, sir. Can you slide को वो pull कर दे?
जी, मेरा ख्याल है पुल हो गई है, आपको नजर आ रही होगी.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you very much. I personally very thankful to STPI who gave me this opportunity to present my work, and I like the main theme of this conference because it is the need of the day for the Pakistan, especially for Pakistan, because Pakistan is the country which is seriously affecting with the climate change in coming time, and also we need to engage the communities. So both the themes are very good in terms of sustainability and also for the need of the country. So in my presentation, my main focus will be on a system dynamic study, which we did in Rachna Doab Basin of Pakistan, and it will talk about how we have developed a tool framework, how we have engaged the stakeholder, and how we have quantified the resilience system for this case study. And it will also talk about a system dynamic modeling, which is a state-of-art model which combines social, ecological, and environmental aspects. So entirely different domains are linked together in this. So this model is basically consists of seven stages, which I have shown on this pathway. First stage is engagement of the stakeholder. Second is the system dynamic modeling based on the stakeholder feedback. Third is developing a physical model, which will talk about the physical processes in the system dynamic modeling, then putting the climate change scenario in that, working out the resilience, and finally give some strategies for the sustainable future. So the research motivation was the groundwater quality deterioration and groundwater quantity depletion, mainly in basins of Pakistan, that's the Rachna Doab Basin or Bari Doab Basin. The groundwater quality is quickly deteriorating, and also the levels of groundwater are going very down. So in terms of agriculture perspective, we want to get some investigation or evaluation for the sustainable future. So this shows the map of two periods. In 1977, we had good quality, and also the groundwater levels were very high. But in 2012, the quality is worse, and also the groundwater has gone down. And it is feared that in coming days, we won't be able to even extract the groundwater. So what we did, we linked two models. One was the system dynamic model, and other was the SESMOD, which actually the model which describe soil water plant relationship. And these two models were linked, and we developed a stakeholder assisted socio-hydrological model. This model has many benefits, like we can study the climate change. It's an open source model. It's available on GitHub. You can download easily, and if you want to use it, you can use it. And the model was used for a groundwater management studies on the watershed scale. So actually the model consists of many modules. There were 8 modules, and 9 was the physical model. So we developed the module of irrigation efficiency, crop yield and income, groundwater abstraction, surface water storage. These modules are actually linked with the feedback. Let's say if we take the example of crop yield and income modules, it get the feedback from irrigation efficiency, surface water storage, and groundwater abstraction for the expenses. If the farmer have sufficient economic return in his pocket, he will be able to invest back in this areas in order to increase the efficiency, or in order to install more tube wells. So the area was located in Rachna Doab Basin of Pakistan. That's actually the Shorecoat area, Tobas Tek Singh area, and Jhang area. The land is mostly saline in those regions. Groundwater is of worse quality. So we take the observation of 50 observation wells. and the data was taken from 1980 to 2010 for 30 years. The model was developed considering the land use changes, soil, and we took the data of also meteorological stations in order to study the climate of the area. Tube wells data was also investigated, and we observe 50 observation wells data was taken, and this shows the record, temporal record of the observation well. And finally, we divide the whole area into 215 polygons to develop a distributed model. So the research objective was to apply a dynamically coupled biophysical socioeconomic model to test stakeholder preferred policies. Like stakeholder said that if we line the canals, we have some rainwater harvesting options, and if we improve the irrigation, like currently they are doing the flood irrigation, but they were interested in the drip irrigation. So they were on the opinion that it might solve the problem. So we study two parameters like the farm income and water table depth. In terms of the resilience, we consider these two parameters because the farm income and water table are directly related to the sustainable future. So one parameter was from the economic background, while the other parameter was from the physical background. So it shows the nature of this socio-economic environmental model. You can study the economic parameter as well as the physical parameter with this model. So finally, we put some shocks. Two shocks were put in the system. One was the market inflation, that if the economic condition of the country drops, then what will be its impact on the agriculture. And the second was the decrease in the canal water supplies, because we were thinking that in the coming future, our canal supplies will drop significantly. Also, there were some climatic shocks, and for those climatic shocks, we downloaded the data from IPCC. So three representative pathways were studies. One was the zero, that's the business as usual. If we don't control our carbon emissions, and the temperature is increasing in the same way, then we study RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5. So I think these are the some standard notations, and everybody knows about it. So for the research significance was that this resilience analysis will allow the marginal stakeholder to make local economic lifestyle and organizational changes in order to improve their socio-ecological sustainability. So that was the qualitative significance. If you are meeting and collaborating with the marginal stakeholder and you show them some pictures like the causal loop diagram and the outputs, they will understand that what will happen in the future, and they might change their behaviors for the adaptive resilience. The second was for the decision makers and the more experts. This was the quantitative knowledge acquired from the resilience analysis, and this knowledge will allow the government officials and key stakeholders like the experts or the decision maker to better understand the dynamics of the social ecological vulnerability, and also help in designing sustainable strategies, policies, or legislative measures. So how we did that? We used this dynamically coupled socioeconomic environmental model. We put two shocks. One shock was the inflation, and the other shock was the decrease in the canal water supplies. We checked 3 policies. One policy was rainwater harvesting, other policy was canal lining, and the third policy was it will come in next slide. I forgot the name of this third policy, and we put some RCPs in order to study the climate change impact. And finally, the model is simulated, and we compiled our analysis in terms of 2 variables, like the farmer income and the water table depth. So the shocks were introduced in terms of the duration and the intensities. Like if we see the canal supplies, we introduced the duration of the supply and also the intensity of the supply. So we can reduce the intensity of the canal supplies for a particular duration, let's say 5 years. We can say that for the next 5 years, the canal supply might reduce 5% or 10% in order to see its impact on the system. So we studied 3 policies. The other policy was the irrigation improvement. So that's the scenario simulations. These are the shocks. First column is the climate scenarios. The last column is the shock scenario, and the third is the middle column is for the stakeholder preferred policies. So 24 simulations were made, and 25 simulation was for the base case scenario where no policy or no shock was introduced, and this base case scenario was later used to normalize the data. So for the simulation from each polygon was analyzed for this shock response curve. This is the resilience curve. 5 parameters of resilience curve were studied, like this RT is the response time, how the system come back to its original state, how much time the system need to come back to its original state. RT is the area between the baseline and the curve, and RR is the rate of the return of the curve. So if you want to get more detail, a paper is published on this study in ecological modeling, and I will give the references at the end of the slide to give more detail. Due to the short time, I am not discussing all the parameters now. So this is the total procedure. First, we simulate the scenarios, then we normalize the data to the base case. Normalized output were processed for 2 parameters like the water table depth and farmer income. Then for each for these outputs, 5 resilience parameter, which I showed in previous slides, were extracted, and then data is organized and analyzed. So model gave us the opportunity to see the impact of the policy on a special basis, like what's going on in the tail for the tail user, what's going on for the head user, and what's going on for the middle users. So this is the final output for considering the shock of market inflation. The curves are for no policy. If you see if we apply a shock and there's no policy, then the curve is entirely in the bottom. So the system will not recover back. If we have no policy and we apply a shock, then we have the canal lining. The canal lining policy is gradually going back to its original state. Then we have the rainwater harvesting, irrigation improvement, and we have the base case scenario. If you see the base case scenario, it's a straight line. Actually, when you normalize the data, with the base case, it shows no shock and no policy. So it will be a business as usual case. So next, we study the output in for under the canal supply shocks. So for the water table, the levels are fluctuating. The fluctuation is basically due to the monsoon region season. We have the rainfall in monsoon, and we have no rainfall after the monsoon. That's why with the recharge, the water table levels goes up, and when the extraction increases, the water level goes down. So I'm showing one matrix RP. That's the area under the curve of baseline, and also the shock curve. Similarly, the 5 matrices like RR, RT curves are developed, and then it shows the impact of this policies on 2 variables like farmer income and water table depth. Also, the climate change scenarios impact were studied. So this is the climate change scenario 0, business as usual. Shock 1, which is the increase in inflation. Shock 2, which is the decrease in canal water supplies. So it shows RP. If RP is low, like here in RCP0, RP value is indicated by low bar. It means that the system will be more resilient, or the water table depth will not drop if we improve our irrigations. Similarly, if we adopt the criteria of canal lining, it will not help, and the water table will drop, because with the canal lining, the recharge will decrease, and when the recharge will decrease, the water will ultimately go down. That's why its value is.
Sir, sorry for interruption. Kindly conclude the time.
हाँ जी, conclusion पे ही है. The study conclude that rainwater harvesting is the more effective stakeholder defined policy measure for improving and maintaining the resilience, and but it is effective in the upper and middle portion of the regions where the canal lining was the more effective policy in the downstream portion. Similarly, the irrigation improvement and canal lining policies were more effective in improving the resilience matrix of water table depth than those of farmer income. These are some suggested readings. So it will help in understanding the model if you want to explore it more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Kataumal from Tharparkar Sindh to speak on community perspective on disaster resilience. Please, sir.
Thanks to SDPI who extend opportunity to share climate change in Tharparkar, which they witnessed after irregular and late monsoon. Major changes is that the community lose interest in agriculture and livestock due to irregular and late monsoon and enter into wage labor. They have succeeded in entering wage labor, but their migration continues because no livelihood in Tharparkar. Now, after many years, there is a construction of houses whole year. So there is a livelihood opportunity in Thar, but there were no skill, especially of electrician, plumber, carpenter, and mason. And now, hopefully, government will design a strategy with NGOs and Thar coal companies and design and prepare strategy for skill training to reduce migration and improve livelihood.
Thank you, sir. Due to time constraint, I will skip my presentation. That was actually on mobile-based technologies for citizen engagement and disaster risk reduction. But just to take a few minutes to speak about the mobile-based technologies that we can use for citizen engagement and disaster risk reduction. We often see that community participation is considered as a challenging job due to the cost, due to the lack of skill, specifically on the part of the facilitator who intends to engage people in focused research or community development activities. There is low efficiency because the people are competing with work, domestic job, and other daily obligations, so that would find time to participate in community engagement activities. And sometimes most of the agencies who are claiming to be adopting inclusive approaches toward development is lacking the inclusive approaches on the ground. Apart from this, the COVID-19 actually provided us the opportunity to reflect back and think about the new ways of community participation. So in this context, at the University of Peshawar, we are working on 4 platforms. Our first platform is Twittionary platform that is basically for mining the Twitter data that is related to the climate change or the sustainable development or disaster risk reduction, because we think that human conversation is actually, it is precious data and it shall not be wasted. So what we are doing, we are developing a platform to capture the scattered Twitter data and you use it at the national level in National Emergency Operations Center, or at the provincial level at the Provincial Emergency Operation for better disaster management or for enhanced emergency response management. Our second technology platform is actually, we named it Resilient Pakistan, and it is focusing on ecosystem restoration. We have taken 4 nationally determined contributions from the document that was published for the last year Glasgow Climate Summit. The first one is the land use change in forestry. So the data that the government is planting in various parts, that is actually quantifiable data available in the government record. But what is the contribution of the community are? What sort of plants are compatible with the geography of Chitral, and what sort of plants are compatible with the Tharparkar? So we are actually bringing that intelligence where the community can look into the aspects that what I can select a suitable plant in a particular place for a particular ecological region. The renewable energy on the government side or on in the private sector, when investment is made in the solar energy or other aspect of renewable energy, it is documented, but the community level or at the grassroots level, it is not documented. So we are empowering communities to contribute that into the nationally determined contribution as well. And the Recharge Pakistan, which is focused on water harvesting, or rainwater harvesting, specifically in mountainous areas. We can see that the people are now facing the water challenges, not in the in the deserts, but in the mountainous areas where the people are very closely located with the glacier. They are facing a problem of drinking water supply. So they have started augmenting the rainwater and using it. So we want to bring that into a platform which can be shared for with the other communities. And the last one is the protected areas, like what sort of activities can be conducted in protected areas. So the Mobilize platform that you heard a lot about in the last 2 sessions, we actually are planning to customize participatory tools. The models that the speaker talked about was actually a little different, but the community level mapping, that the social mapping that we are doing in the participatory rural appraisal activities, how we can digitize that and then present that in a GIS sort of software. So we are working on bringing in the citizen science approach and clubbing it with the participatory methodologies, and then to digitize those aspects. And the last one that we have already implemented is the Madadgar app for communities and we have developed it for the Provincial Disaster Management Authority. The app is actually developed with the notion to empower communities to report about disaster. The early warning system in Pakistan is having a linear approach where the authorities can communicate to the community, but the community cannot communicate back to the authorities. Like if a flash flood occur in Chitral, the information reach up to 3 to 4 hours to the district administration that a flash flood has occurred. If a Gulf activity occur in the remote valleys of Gilgit-Baltistan, it is not reaching on time to ensure community response or to inform the downstream communities that they can take precautionary measures. So we provided a full access to the community that they can report the localized disasters to the Disaster Management Authority in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and the information can be viewed or can be received within seconds from the community within the district level emergency operation center and at the provincial level emergency operation center. The community themselves can conduct damage and rapid need assessment in post-disaster situation. There is specific context of risk assessment where we can see that majority of the reports at the government level or data at the government level, it is scattered. People are the common public, they don't have access to. So we have embedded component of risk assessment, and in the next phase, what we actually have planned in the next generation of the app is that we are bringing the participatory methodology, like you can virtually conduct a focus group discussion with the community member. When the community member is free, they can listen to what discussion has already been held, and they can add their own perspective into that discussion. Another component is that actually we deeply evaluated this year Murray snowstorm catastrophe, that the people were not aware that where a dedicated evacuation center is located. So we have integrated the geo coordinates of the evacuation centers that has been identified by the PDMA in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and by one click it directs you through a SAP route in any district of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. In each district there are 4 to 6 dedicated evacuation center. Another aspect is volunteer engagement. At the moment there are 35,000 registered volunteers of the civil defense in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. We want to engage all the volunteers in each district. So currently there is an SOS message that we can send to the volunteer where we need their services. In the next generation, what we are doing is we are connecting the volunteer on the ground so they can talk to each other in real-time disaster scenario to respond to disaster, and then to engage more people in using this technology platform. We want to add a component of virtual games where someone from Karachi, Quetta, Peshawar, they are in a team of 5 people are coming together. There are certain questions and they are answering. And then the Disaster Management Authority have this option in Liberty that they can design such games for each hazard. Currently, we are researching on two board games at the University of Peshawar, and we want to customize it to the local environment, and then we'll be implementing with the school safety still at the grassroots level. So, and there will be dedicated in future, what we have planned that there will be dedicated section for audio podcast, video messages, the textual information, and creation of a local walkie-talkie channel in time of disaster where the community member, the authorities, the civil society organization can connect with each other, and they can exchange what sort of problems they are facing in terms of during emergency situation. In the latest disaster news, we now send, when we want to send a news about a disaster, it is sent now to each user of the app. But in future, we want to add functionality where it can be sent into a particular geographical location. For example, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, I just want to inform the people at Upper Chitral. So the people of Peshawar and DI Khan won't be getting that message. But if it is a continuing disaster, for example, crossing one district, entering to another, then to another, like this flood. So in that context, in the next phase, what we are planning is that as a volunteer, if I'm standing in Kalam and I take a picture and add information and sending it into the app, someone is standing in Bahrain Bazaar, someone is sharing from Mingora, someone is sharing from Chekdara on the other side on the river Panchkoda, someone is sharing information from Deer Lure, or someone is sharing from River Mastuj at Chatral. All this information is getting organized through an AI feature on the Google map, and the people downstream in Charsadda, Naushera, or in Punjab and Sindh, they can track in real time that where the disaster, where the flood has reached, and what they can do to protect their lives. So this is what we are doing at the moment. The Madadgar app is available on the Play Store for testing at the moment. For open testing, we have completed the closed testing, but it is available for open testing. So if you have any suggestion, that is most welcome. You can go to the Play Store, download the app, use it, and give your feedback and review within the Play Store. And if you want to, if any student who have specifically from the information technology, or someone is interested in ICT solution in climate change, disaster risk reduction, and sustainable development, feel free to contact us. We can help you out with the conceptualization and then the practical implementation of that idea. Thank you so much for listening me patiently. Now I would request the chair of the session, Mr. Salim Shehzad. Now I request Ms. Shabnam Baloch, Country Director, International Rescue Committee, for special remarks. Please, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Distinguished panelists, dear guests, and especially the organizers, good evening. And thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity for sharing my special remarks. First of all, I feel quite overwhelmed because of the lot of technical information I have to consume, and I'm sure you have been consuming since maybe a couple of days. It's a lot to consume. Again, we need a lot of resilience in order to consume all that technical information. But I can clearly see from all this information, which is just shared by our technical experts who have been doing a lot of researches and producing a lot of models, conceptual framework, tools, how to assess if the community and whether the communities are transformed with whatever we have been doing. But what I can clearly see is that there is a gap. There's a gap between what has been produced theoretically and what is on ground when it comes to how we practice all this knowledge and information and how community is consuming it. So it's a good combination of discussion, I would say, when we are seeing policy implementers and then people who are doing researches and producing frameworks, tools, and then communities and the practitioners. By now, by today, I would say, majority of us have already acknowledged that the climate phenomena is a critical threat. Whether we are academia, whether we are practitioners, whether we are communities, whether we belong to any section of the community or the society, we all know that climate is a threat, the phenomena which is happening, what we call it climate change. It has also revealed that there are direct and indirect consequences on every segment of the society at a scale of global, national, and local level. Because we often say that climate change is a global problem, is a global issue, is a global threat. But when it comes to its impact, it has impact at multiple levels, whether it is macro level, at national level, and local and individual levels. We all need to understand that. And since we're talking about sustainable development goals and resilience, so until and unless we have a systematic approach at our levels to adopt and understand these new realities and challenges and become resilient as a community, not only the communities, which we're talking about community in the concept of community, but all of us as a community. Until and unless we understand those threats and be resilient to those threats, I think the sustainable development goals might need another fresh approach to achieve what we have been achieving in the past decades. We also know that Pakistan greenhouse emissions are less than 1%. I think we have been hearing it a lot since the flood of 2022 has affected us. And we also know that in contrast, we are ranked among the group of countries in the world most affected by the climate change. So there are two contrary realities. We don't contribute to CO2 contributions, less than 1%, but on the contrary, we are the most affected ones. And the major challenges experienced by the country include changes in the precipitation, temperature patterns, increase in frequency and intensity of extreme weather conditions, intense and frequent floods, erosion of indigenous knowledge, increasing water scarcity, heat waves. And all these factors are threatening food security, nutrition, and livelihoods. So this is a bit of context where we're talking about the community resilience and the system resilience and the resilience at all levels. Since I'm a practitioner, so my argument will be more in terms of what we have been doing as a practice, as a community of practitioners, and how we have been consuming all this knowledge, how we have been applying this knowledge on ground level, and whether it makes sense to the communities on ground and to the community of practice. Because whatever knowledge we produce, at the end, if we are not able to apply it, if it is not relevant to the people for whom we have created and generated this knowledge, I think it is going to be a very difficult equation, I would say. So we then have to rethink like what type of knowledge we have been producing. As a practitioner and representing the community of practitioners in this field, let me share our vision and approach towards building community resilience, since we're talking about how to engage communities in terms of building their resilience. I have been hearing keenly to my fellow panelists who have been presenting, like what are the barriers to community engagement? And there are multiple, I would say, types of barrier, whether the urban communities or the cultural barriers, and it depends, you know, what type of community you are talking about. So as far as the community of, for example, if I share commitment from my organization, we have aimed to build climate resilience communities, and we have targeted 10,000 communities across 10 countries, which includes Pakistan. And I think these sort of commitments we all have to come forward with, because until and unless our commitments are not concrete, they're not close to the reality, it is going to be lost somewhere. We support communities' resilience before, during, and after climate-related shocks. So it's not a one-time approach. We all have to work with the communities before, during, and after climate-related shocks and disasters by mapping climate vulnerability hazards and supporting community-led natural resource management. Because when we talk about community engagement, it's always community-led approach, because when I was talking earlier, I was talking about erosion of indigenous knowledge. So this is where we need to understand how community can lead all that. That is one of the barriers. I think if we don't put community in the center of any of the effort which we are going to initiate, then I think it's not going to be very effective. We also promote green vocational skills to build the resilience of communities and ensure sustainable livelihoods. while putting women's and girls' needs at the center of our work. Equally important, we also invest in building the resilience of communities by strengthening local adaptation plans. Local adaptation plans of actions to better sustain climate stress and shocks and reduce the need of emergency humanitarian response. Because the needs are growing, they're growing every day, they're becoming complex, and we are short of resources. We do not have resources to cater to all these emerging needs. So until and unless communities are better prepared, they are resilient, they are able to reduce and minimize those needs, it will be a challenge for all of us, whether we are at a level of academia or policy implementers or our community ourselves. It will be very, very difficult. I would also like to share some of our established community resilience building practices. For example, we have been introducing climate smart agriculture to the communities in order to address the impact of climate change, because it is essential to promote climate smart adaptation, community-led natural resource management, disaster risk reduction, regenerative agriculture, early warning system at local level, as you were mentioning how effective it was. And of course, the local adaptation plan for action for different sectors, because you have to have a different local adaptation plan for all the sectors, and as well as the integrated local adaptation plan. It is also critical to adopt conflict sensitive approaches to address critical needs in the sector, because otherwise it can be counterproductive. Whatever approaches you are going to adopt, it can be counterproductive. When we talk about community engagement, we also talk about do no harm approaches and have to be very, very sensitive, whether it is conflict sensitive or not. We also introduce resilient economic recovery programs, for example, community climate resilience, working alongside local partners. Partnerships are very important, because as you could see for now, like there are different types of information, there are different types of approaches and models. So until and unless we develop all these partnerships at all levels, we're not going to benefit from whatever we have been talking about. So we emphasize a lot on building partnerships at local level and of course at national and provincial level, especially at the grassroots levels with the communities. We also invest on community social protection and social protection mechanisms, because when the vulnerability increases, capacity reduces, the social protection systems also erode. It is very important that community has their social protection mechanisms protected, strengthened, and further strengthened. We also work on resilient and diversified livelihood, because as we have been mentioning that we are mainly agriculture-based economy, and our livelihoods are based on agriculture. So if agriculture sector is very much vulnerable to these new climate realities, it is very difficult if we don't diversify our means of livelihood through skill development, through generation of new knowledge, through diversifying the means of those livelihoods. It is a kind of compromising when we talk about the resilient communities. So we build their capacity in terms of diversifying their livelihood. And then climate resilient WASH systems at community level. We have been establishing many model WASH villages at schools and health facilities for replication and promotion of climate resilience WASH, because whatever models we have been talking about and the policy implementations we have been seeing, we have practiced these models on ground. They have been very successful. You all have to go and see and promote and scale up. Otherwise, that will be investment in vain. There's nobody who is going to get benefit from that. I'll give you one recent example of this 2022 flood. When we visited some of the villages in Sindh, I remember we invested in some of the communities on DRR, disaster risk reduction and preparedness measures and resilience building in 2015. So those communities who were trained in DRR, they were better off. They were literally able to save their lives and the livelihoods, and they were less affected. So when one of my colleagues was talking about how to assess the impact of whether the communities are transformed or not, so the tools are available. When we went to assess what has happened to the communities in the face of 2022 flood, then we realized that those communities who were engaged on DRR approaches, they were better well equipped. And of course, building disaster risk resilience through trainings and multiple other interventions. I'll just end my remarks because I'm sensitive about time limitations as well. I will just emphasize that people at the grassroots level, people we call communities, including all of us, they really need confidence that they have a voice in decision making. And one of the barriers, if they don't have confidence, it is very difficult to engage them in the meaningful conversation and the meaningful engagements. Communities that have meaningful engagement with their residents, with their people, they are better to address the long-term challenges because that is a key factor. If that is not in place, they cannot be prepared for the long-term shocks and long-term challenges. Community engagement is critical for disaster resilience, as well as inclusive planning. That is the only thing which can make this change sustainable. So I will end here. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I request Mr. Salim Shehzad Malik, Director, PNIC National Disaster Management Authority, for the concluding remarks. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. I won't take much of your time, as I understand the session is already stretching over. So I would first like to congratulate SDPI on conducting such a very useful series of sessions. And I understand that the academicians and the researchers and the practitioners can very well use such knowledge shared during these discussions. Regarding community engagement, that is the topic of today's session, I would like to share that we understand that the community-based disaster management system is basically drives its forth from the philosophy of social capital. That we mean self-help, mutual help, and then public health. So with this view, and especially in the context of Pakistan, where we see that our society is closely knitted. When I say closely knitted means we have a family system in place, that joint family system, extended family system, and then close clans and tribe. So this is basically your, the force that we can capitalize on. By realizing the importance of community engagement, National Disaster Management Authority prepared a National Disaster Management Plan for 10 years that is under review for a further extension these days. And the community-based disaster risk management is a very key component in that plan. We have also set standards for CBDRM engagements, community engagements under CBDRM, and the objectives have also been laid out in that plan. So I just wanted to share these updates from National Disaster Management Authority being their representative. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I request Dr. Shafqat Munir to pay a vote of thanks to the guest.
First of all, I would like to thank Shehzad Saab. He has given us a very good news that the plan is, in the review, for which we are looking forward. That's a big news, sir. Thank you very much. That's the, outcome of this session, I would say. I would like to thank all the panelists, Shabnam Baloch Sahaba. She really picked up the points from the ground, which were really, they picked up from their work. These are very important, and she nicely correlated it with the technical presentation and papers which were earlier presented in the session, which were really important, because when we measure resilience and we have to develop some model to look at for future planning, then we need these kind of academic papers. And for practice and to go to the people, then we really need what practicing Shabnam has shared with us. And of course, we had some community perspective as well. On this, I would not take much time. I would like to thank you again. And I would like to thank Dr. Koshal from the University of Salford, Dr. Mushtaq Ahmed, Hisham Tariq from the university, Dr. Azhar Inam Sahab, Dr. Khatumal Sahab, Shabnam Sahib, and Salim Sahab. And thank you, all of you who were there and listened. Thank you. Let's have chat over tea there outside. Thank you. Oh, group photo for the panelists. Thank you. Please, my team, resilience team,